Hey, this is Horner, and we're going to look at your interactive science notebook where we're going to place the different types of transport for different materials within a cell. So you'll see passive transport, we'll have osmosis, we're going to talk about active transport, and finally protein transport. So you want to cut these out for sure, you want to get them into your book, and then you want to use this video in order to fill out the notes that go for each of these different types of things. So to start off on the notes, what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the first type, which is called passive transport. And that's where we're taking a high concentration of molecules. So we might have maybe 100 water molecules, and we're going to move that to a low concentration of molecules, maybe within a cell, where we might only have about 10. And so because we have so many here, they naturally want to move right into the cell. It'd be similar to if I had maybe 300 people in a gym and it started to get really warm in the gym, or there was an annoying smell or something bad happens in the gym, like there's a fire. People would move naturally out into the hallway where there wouldn't be as many people. So what is passive transport? This is the diffusion of molecules across the cell membrane without the use of energy. So it just naturally happens. And this is used for movement of molecules from a high concentration, so there's our high concentration, to a low concentration with the concentration gradient. So that just means it's kind of like getting in a canoe and then moving downstream. It just happens very easily. This process will continue until all the concentrations of everything reach equilibrium. And that just means that they are equal. So you would see that they were equal on each side of the membrane. So if this is the membrane on the outside, if I have 10 or so things here and I have 10 here, then we've reached equilibrium. But what will happen is, even though I have 10 on each side, I still will have some coming in and some going out. But for right now, we're just looking at how they're going in, since they're just running across the membrane, going from a high concentration to a low concentration. Some examples of some molecules that might do this are carbon dioxide, water, and oxygen, things that we either need to get into or out of our cells, one of the two. We can look at another way of thinking about passive transport. Osmosis is a type of passive transport, meaning that it does not require the cell to use any energy to move water across the cell membrane. So we're going to draw an analogy here. You don't have to physically draw this. That's just a kind of a manner here of speaking. We can draw an analogy comparing that riding a bicycle and a hill to passive transport. And basically all you want to think about is we're going to start high on the hill. Okay, so this is high on the hill and this is low on the hill. And if you start up high on a hill and you take your feet off, you'll notice that you just kind of roll right down the hill. So there's no energy required there. You just take your feet off and it automatically goes down. And that's basically what this says. You're just riding your bike downhill. You can just keep your feet off the pedals and we just fly down the hill. You don't have to do anything, so it doesn't require any energy. So it's like moving from high concentration, high on the hill, to low concentration, the bottom part of the hill or the low part of the hill. And we call that passive transport. So let's move on to the next one. So sheet 2 is osmosis. Basically, osmosis is just the diffusion of water molecules across the cell membrane, and it moves from a high concentration to a low concentration with a gradient again. And this just continues until the concentrations reach equilibrium. So water has its own term for this diffusion of water molecules across the membrane, or a passive transport from a high concentration to a low concentration. For the next part, this is called active transport, and this is when we want to do something difficult. For example, we want to move some particles in a low concentration to an area where there's a higher concentration. So I kind of think about this as maybe you're trying to get into a Colts football game there, and you're a little bit late. So we're moving from a low concentration to a high concentration, and that does require some energy. So we're going to use ATP energy in order to do that. And like we said, it's used for the movement of chemicals from a low concentration to a higher concentration, so from less to an area where there's a lot. We might do that with sodium and potassium to try to get some things to happen in a cell. This process can also be used in order to move big particles across the cell membrane, and to do that easily, so we have to require energy to do that. Glucose and starch would be a couple of those molecules that we might want to move in. That's sheet 3. So let's think about this. If we move from a low area on our bicycle, so we move from a low area up to a high area on a hill, to do that, it requires this energy. And if you think about pedaling uphill, you know you have to pedal pretty hard. So we call that active transport. Passive, remember, was just kind of passively going down the hill. Active is actually using a lot of energy to try to get up that hill. Here we're going from a low concentration to a high concentration, or we're trying to move something really heavy from the bottom of the hill to the top. If we look at the very last part, this is just using a transport protein. So there's a protein that's embedded in the cell. So here's our cell wall, or cell membrane, sorry. And we've got in that cell membrane, we've got this set of proteins. And those proteins, using some energy, will allow big molecules to go in and out. So this is basically just used for any molecules that are too large to move through the cell membrane. And it does require active transport. So it's basically just something that we're using the proteins to do our active transport. And that is the end of the notes.